Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to our Saturday Dhamma. We've got a live in-house audience. We've got, I'm sure, some people tuning in live on YouTube. Nobody yet. Oh, a few people. And then this video, of course, will be available later, and I think some people actually watch it then. Today is the full moon. It's the blue moon, which doesn't really mean anything. I mean, honestly, the full moon doesn't mean anything either. It's except to the tides, to the water it has an effect. To humans, they say the moon might affect people's moods, but it is still just a conceptual reality. The fact that the moon is full doesn't actually mean anything. It just means, well, the moon and the earth are in a specific alignment, right? I don't know. Somewhere, somehow with the sun. And it has to do with light. That's all I know. But apropos of it being the full moon, just by chance, we're looking at the Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta. Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta. Purnama means full moon. Purna means full. Maha is great, means this is a big sutta, the longer one. The next sutta is going to be the Chula Purnama Sutta, also on the full moon but shorter, probably about something else. But this sutta, the Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta, is interesting for two reasons. First reason is it's in the format of questions and answers. So it's a chance for us to look at how question and answer sessions worked in the time of the Buddha. And it's a reassurance that our question and answers, weekly question and answer sessions, are following a very ancient tradition of asking questions of the teacher. Now, mind you, our format is a little bit different. In this sutta, the Buddha was sitting out in the open, under the full moon, and his audience was all a live, present audience. There may have been angels and gods listening in as well, but it doesn't say. He was in Savatthi, in Pubarama, but he was outside under the full moon at night. And of course the other reason why this sutta is quite interesting is because of the content. It's, I think, quite useful and hopefully helpful for meditators. So we'll get to see some really deep questions and answers, hopefully. So on this occasion, Bhikkhu stands up and bows respectfully in front of the Buddha, and it says he has a question. The Buddha says, sit down, sit in your seat, ask the question. And he asks about the five aggregates. The majority of the sutta is about what we call the five aggregates. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'll go through the questions, I guess, one by one, but we'll talk a little bit in general about the five aggregates. The five aggregates are the Buddha's definition of a being, what constitutes a being. That's how it's generally explained. But there's a problem with that explanation in the fact that, as we all know, the Buddha eschewed the concept of a being. That he didn't want to entertain this idea that there is such a thing as a being. So he said in lieu of that there is these 5 aggregates. And so it's often taken to mean that this being is made up of 5 aggregates, 5 parts that you just mush together and you get me. But that's not really the way it is. It's important to understand the 5 aggregates as they're taught in Buddhism. The 5 aggregates are, and this is his first question, form, which is physical, feeling, which is simply sensations, pleasant, painful, neutral. 3 kinds, basically 3 kinds of feeling. Painful feeling, pleasant feeling, and neutral feeling. The third is what we call, I guess, perception or memory recognition. It has basically the function of helping us to recognize things. The fourth category is our reactions, really, and it's a lot of different things, but mainly it's our reactions to those things that we recognize. And the fifth is consciousness, the actual awareness, the overarching awareness that allows the other aggregates to be experienced. And so they're really better understood as a way of explaining and describing the experience. And that's how the Buddha uses them. The idea is that every time we have an experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, and thinking, each moment involves these 5 aggregates. Each experience, when you see something, when you hear something, during that experience there are these 5 aggregates involved. So in seeing, there's the light and the eye, and that's the first one. That's rupa, that's form or physical. You feel calm, or after you see it, then there's feeling happy and pleased by it, like, oh, seeing something beautiful and there's pleasure, or seeing something ugly and then there's displeasure. The third is the recognition involved with being able to recognize this is a person, this is white, this is blue, this is red, and so on. And that's the third aggregate. The fourth aggregate is our reactions. You like it, you don't like it, you identify with it, and so on. And it's many other things. The fourth is all of the mental stuff that goes on, that surrounds and proliferates based on the object. And the fifth is the awareness of it, the fact that we're conscious, oh, this is happening. The fact that we are cogito, that we are having the experience. And this is going to come back near the end of the sutta as being important. And it's important to note that as we go through this sutta, and really as we practice Buddhism, that Buddhism isn't about theorizing. It's not a question of, do these 5 aggregates exist? Do they not exist? Are they real? Is that reality? It's a question of, much more a question of, when you teach these 5 aggregates, what happens to the person who you're teaching? So, for example, if you believe in a self, the question is not, are you right or are you wrong? The question is, what happens when you believe in a self? The recognition is that you believe in a self, that's what's real. So if I say, I believe there's a self, the question isn't, is there a self or isn't there a self? The question is, what do you believe? You are believing this. And then what is the result of that? That's what's real. It's important to understand this way of looking at things. It sounds kind of like it's just, if you have a superficial listening or idea about this, that it just makes you think that it's avoiding answering important questions about what exists, but it's not really. Because your whole idea about there is a self, there isn't a self, or anything really, about science of full moons and all that stuff, is all activity in your mind. Meanwhile, while you're speculating and theorizing, all of that speculating and theorizing is what's really real. So as you're asking about what's real, the asking, the wondering, that's going on, and that's real. So not only is it much more important and much more consequential than whether the soul exists or whether the moon is full or so on, it's also much more real, much more true. So you'll notice, especially near the end, you'll notice how the Buddha deals with questions about reality, and how the Buddha approaches reality, and why Buddhism doesn't say, what is this being made of? What is a being? And doesn't believe in the ideas of being, because it's not what's really happening. As I'm talking right now, whether I exist, whether it's me talking and so on, is all not real. It's not it's not a description of reality. The description of reality is the talking, the thinking, all of the stuff that goes on. You listening. It's not a question of do I exist, do I don't exist. It's a question of what's going on in your mind, what activity is happening, what experiences are occurring. Because those are the most real thing you can possibly describe or conceive of. The most real thing in the universe. So this is how the Buddha describes reality, these 5 aggregates. And he talks about them as the 5 aggregates of clinging. And it's a difficult compound. Bhikkhu Bodhi here gives a really... I'm not convinced about his translation. It really means the 5 aggregates involved with clinging, or caught up in clinging, that have some relationship to clinging. They are the clinging aggregates. And it's curious because we often don't think of them that way. We think of seeing and our experience of seeing as something neutral. Even as Buddhists, I talk about it like that. Seeing is just neutral. But the Buddha described them as clinging, and I think we can understand this in 2 ways. One, that they certainly lead to clinging, and the most important thing about them is how we cling to them. But I think more to the point is the fact that they are based on clinging. So our experiences depend upon our clinging. Why I was born a human being, why I have all the experiences I have everything to do with my activities, what I've done to get here. And the most important part of what I've done to get here is what I wanted. So my ambitions, my goals, what drove me, what pushed me on. And in fact, when you break it all down, this is what leads to existence entirely. We are who we are and what we are because of craving. So it's not incidental and it's not separate. Craving is really the basis of these things. That's why they're called the clinging aggregate. Whatever you cling to, whatever you get caught up in. So that's his first question, just what are they? And the Buddha says, yeah, those are the 5. And then he asks the second question. He says, what are the 5 clinging aggregates rooted in? And the Buddha said, well, that's easy. They're rooted in desire. And so that's basically what I just said. That's the second question. The third question is an odd one, I suppose, but it's something that you find often in Buddhist discourse. He asks, is the clinging the same as the 5 aggregates? the five clinging aggregates, or is the clinging something apart from the five clinging aggregates? So this is also related to this idea of craving being or clinging being the root of these things, and it being caught up in them, is because the Buddha's answer is interesting. He says it's neither one, it's neither the same. The clinging is neither the same as the clinging aggregates, nor is it different. And I think the point is that the clinging aggregates describe a process. Again, the Buddha seems to be avoiding the idea of coming up with an entity like these aggregates. The clinging aggregates is a name for a process. It's not a name for a thing or a bunch of things. It's a name for a bunch of aspects of experience, which is a process. So clinging aggregates is these aggregates that involve the process of liking things and disliking things and getting attached to things and obsessed with things and becoming who we are, becoming a human, being reborn, and so on. The next question I don't quite understand, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but he says, can there be diversity in the desire? Can there be diversity in the desire regarding these five aggregates? And so I understand the question to mean, is it the same for everyone, or is it always the same, or something like that? And the Buddha said there is diversity. But his explanation, I don't quite understand. He says, may my material, someone might think, may my material form be thus in the future. May my feelings be thus in the future. May my perceptions be thus in the future. May my mental formations be thus in the future. May my consciousness be thus in the future. Thus there is diversity. And it's the one question that Bhikkhu Bodhi doesn't try to explain. He's got explanations for some of them, which are often helpful. But this one, either it's just so obvious and I'm a dunce, or else they had as much trouble with me as me, and they just skipped it. Maybe it's just totally obvious, but I'm going to skip it. I mean, certainly there are some interesting things you can say about diversity, how it differs from person to person, and how the process is different. I don't know. I think we'll just go on. The next question is quite reminiscent of our study of Abhidhamma, I think. It says, what is the cause and condition for the manifestation of the aggregates? And so the Buddha details what is the cause and condition of each of the aggregates. Why do they come about? Why do we have these five things? Now we said they're rooted in craving, and our desires and our ambitions are what give rise to our experiences. Our experiences that we have, the fact that I'm having these experiences that I'm having, have very much to do with craving, but there's something a little more technical that he's getting at here. And so the Buddha says, with rupa we have the four elements. We have our hardness and softness, stiffness, flaccidity, and we have heat and cold, and then we have this cohesion, which is the fourth element. And that's what gives rise to matter. That's the basis of it. So when we talk about matter, and we'll talk about things as matter, right? A table, a chair. But the material aspect of it is really, this totally avoids or discards or even denies the physical concept of atoms and so on, because that's not really physical. That's something you think about and you conceive of. But what's really physical is the feeling of it, the hardness, the softness, and so on. That's real in a way that atoms are not real, even though a material scientist would probably strongly disagree with me. So it's a different paradigm. And then the cause of feelings, the cause of recognition, and the cause of formations, our thoughts about things. These three, so the second, the third, and the fourth, their cause, their condition is contact. With the contact, and contact here means when the mind contacts the object, consciousness. When consciousness and the object arise together, there are all these other ones. So that's their cause. They come along with consciousness. Consciousness, the cause of consciousness is nama rupa, he says, which means continuation of experience from moment to moment to moment. So it's the closest thing you might come to a being, but it just means this continuation, this process of body and mind, body, mind, again, 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 again. It supports conscious experience. Consciousness and body and mind are kind of caught up in each other. It's kind of the body and mind part it really describes more the process. Consciousness is a real thing, right? The moments, but body and mind as a thing, it really describes the fact that there's a process. That's what gives rise to consciousness, I guess is what he's saying. So the next questions, and then the questions move on to things about self. Right? We always get these questions about self, and that really makes up the rest of the sutta. So it's apropos because Buddhist theory, the way we talk about this, is that the five aggregates are what we see as self. So the next question is, how does identity view come to be? Personality view. How does one come to believe I am? I exist. I have a soul. This is me. This is my body, and so on. The belief in the self, the belief in the soul. How does that come to be? So in Buddhism, the Buddha says, an ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in the Dhamma of the noble ones, right? Personality view arises in people who aren't spiritual, who aren't followers of noble ones, aren't followers of true enlightened beings. So sometimes they're followers of other teachers who we would argue are deluded and are misled. But of course, every religious and spiritual tradition, or many of them, will say the same things about everybody else. So if we're going to provide evidence for our claims, the Buddha says that it's because they take one of these aggregates, or many of these aggregates, one or more of these aggregates, as self. So for many people, of course, the physical is self. You have these feelings and these experiences, and you also have light and sound and smell and taste and feeling. And all of these contribute to make you think, wow, this form is a real body. This body really exists. This is my body. This is I am this body. Or feeling. We feel pain and we think, I am feeling pain. And we have our recognition, recognizing things, our ability to remember things. This can be quite devastating when someone's memory starts to decline. When a person gets Alzheimer's or so, it's quite devastating because you lose your sense of self. It's we didn't realize the strong attachment we had to our memory. Memory is such an important part of experience, our ability to recognize. Without recognition, much of the flavor and the our activity surrounding experience is gone. And our emotional states we take as self. I am a person who gets angry. I am a person who, I like this, I like that, I don't like this, I don't like that. I'm depressed, I'm bored, I'm worried, anxious, and so on. I love you, I love me. And consciousness, of course, so consciousness we get the idea because it's so constant. Conscious of this, conscious of that, again and again. We get the idea that it's a self. I am conscious. Yes, look at me sitting here conscious. Right? So the claim, the idea here is, and the theory in Buddhism, is that when we say we have a self, it breaks down, and it's one of these five, or many of them. When we say we're clinging to self, when we talk about belief in self, what we're actually saying, or what we're actually basing it on, is one of these five. Some aspect of experience, or many aspects of experience, because ultimately it's as a result, this belief in self arises as a result of a combination of experience and ignorance. So when you experience things with ignorance, with delusion, when your mind is not clear, the experiences that you have will give you wrong ideas. Then he says, how does, his next question is the opposite, how does personality view, identity view not come to be? He says, well, here's someone who is well taught and has regard for wise people, skilled and disciplined in the Dhamma of wise people. When they do not regard these things as self, then there is no identity view. So, important to note here is how significant it is to believe in a self. This isn't just an idle conversation. What's not being mentioned here is how problematic it is to believe in self. I mean, we don't recognize this as a problem in modern society, generally. In fact, it's often thought of as a virtue to have a strong sense of self, or self-possession of who you are. Because in society, well, our goals are generally caught up in craving, caught up in desire. But in order to really get caught up in desire, you need a sense of self, right? If you don't have a sense of self, you'll never get caught up in wanting this or wanting that, because there's no one wanting it. Wanting is one thing, but when you have the idea that it's me wanting, that I am the one who is going to get that possessiveness, it's the cement that creates, well, even society is based on wanting, but it creates a life of wanting this and wanting that for yourself. Instead of just it being a habit, it becomes a weapon, a tool. Craving becomes a tool for the self. And as a result, we get caught up in intense cravings, intense ambitions, and conflict, of course. I mean, all the things that then come as a result. And so, well, the next question, I think it's the next question. The next question gets into that. So, okay, if we're talking about self, if we're talking about what's the problem? Self involves getting what you want, it involves possessiveness, it involves ownership, it involves control, it mainly involves likes and dislikes. So the next question is three things. What's good about that? And what is it that we find good about that? So we call the gratification. And what's the problem with it? Right? Really, what's the problem with wanting things? I get what I want, isn't that good? And so if there is a problem, where there's actual acknowledgement that there is a problem, what's the escape? How do we free ourselves from wanting? So what's the gratification? What's good about these things? Well, physical form gives you pleasure. If you feel soft feelings or warm feelings or cool feelings, it brings you pleasure, it makes you happy. If you have pleasant feelings, that makes you happy. If you have calm feelings, that makes you happy. If you recognize things, if you see a friend, see a loved one, makes you happy. If you like something and you're pleased by something, that makes you happy. If you find something beautiful, that makes you happy. Something attractive, food or the human body or even an animal, see a cute cat or something, it makes you happy. The fact that you find it cute. And consciousness, wow, without consciousness, how could we be happy? We're so happy with consciousness. Because of consciousness, we have all these good things that we can be happy about. I mean, it frightens people to death to think that there might one day be no consciousness. That's why death is so scary. For people who believe there's nothing after death, it can be quite a terrifying thing. Simply because you don't want to lose your consciousness. If I didn't have consciousness, how would I be happy? Yeah, what would I be? I had all these ideas. So that's the gratification. What's the danger? I think you can probably get an inkling of the danger already by these descriptions. When you put things in this quite clear, put it this way, it becomes quite clear that, there's a problem here. What's the problem? What's the problem? Impermanence. Impermanence is the big one. Impermanence, suffering, non-self, really, all three of them. So you say, well, material form makes me happy. Well, does it always? And what happens if your happiness depends on certain types of material? And we see what happens. When other types of material come, we get unhappy. And we become desperate in a sense, always wanting. Our way of life is one of chasing rather than being. We've forgotten how to just be. That's why meditation is so difficult, because we're chasing. We're like playing dodgeball all the time, boxing, trying to avoid the punches. It's quite a desperate situation, and you can see how it becomes more and more desperate the more one clings. The stronger one clings, the more susceptible one is, and the more sensitive one is to that which is unpleasant. And of course with feelings, you can't always have pleasant feelings. With recognitions, you can't always only see your friends. You can't always only like things. Sometimes disliking comes up, or fear or anxiety. And of course you can't always only be conscious of good things. So to set yourself up in this way and think that happiness is that part of experience that is pleasant, is to set yourself up for stress, and increasing stress, the more strong your desires are. It's not a 50-50 thing where you can say, and we do say, oh, life is full of ups and downs, you gotta take the good, gotta take the bad with the good, or whatever. The more you cling to the good, the more desperate your situation becomes, the less. Because, a person who is mindful takes the good with the bad, takes the bad with the good. But they're happy independent, they're at peace, independent of the experience. As another person is always worried about losing and conscious of holding on to the things that they get, and constant stress over chasing after and worrying about and avoiding different aspects of experience. So that's the danger. What's the escape? Well, the escape is the removal of this one thing that we've been talking about throughout, and that's desire. So when we talk about the aggregates of clinging, you remove the clinging and you have no problem. The world isn't such a bad place. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this room or outside. There's nothing wrong with any experience. What's wrong is our attachment to them. The fact that we've put ourselves in this position. The fact that we're clinging to this situation. That this isn't a static experience. This isn't us sitting here. This is us chasing things. We're here because we're chasing things. So it's the chasing that's the real problem. And then he asks a fairly deep question, I think. He says, how does one know and how does one see? I guess it means in which way should one look? And this is really hinting at vipassana, really seeing clearly. How should one look and see and know and see, so that in regards to this body with consciousness and everything else, there's no I-making, mind-making, and underlying tendency to conceit. So what do we do? How do we gain the wisdom that allows us to see what we don't see, what we can't see? To look at it without seeing it as me, as mine. Ahankara, mamankara, no ahankara. Ahankara, I-making, mamankara, mind-making, and underlying tendency to conceit, which is more pernicious than wrong view. Wrong view is done away with early on in the course of training, but there's still always conceit. Conceit is this still thinking of judging yourself. I'm good, I'm bad, I'm better, I'm worse. Even after the views are gone, there's still conceit. So what do we do? And he answers really what he's been answering. It's not really anything new. He says, any material form, any of the 5 aggregates really, form, material form, feeling, recognition or memory, mental formations and consciousness, past, present, future, and what is the words he used? Internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near. One sees all of these things as they actually are with proper wisdom. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. You read this, and an ordinary non-meditator reading this would think, okay, so it's an intellectual exercise of gaining that through logical introspection. That's how we normally would approach this. We say, what is that? How do I understand that? And explain this to me, right? They say, explain this to me. No. You might even be wondering, is he going to explain this to us? Seeing it with, what does it mean to see with proper wisdom? This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. If I could tell you, it wouldn't be something you had to see with proper wisdom, as it actually is. I mean, it's not hard to describe what it would be like. It would be like seeing the experience as it is, seeing arising and ceasing. But even describing that, there's a tendency when you hear that to think of, okay, yeah, I would see, right? of including the I and the self there. That's how we normally approach things. You realize in meditation, when you get into meditation, that it's that idea of a self is completely absent. That process of meditation doesn't include a self, doesn't involve a self at all. I mean, you learn that as you go through the process, and that's really a big part of the culmination of the path of practice, when you get to the point of clearly seeing Nitang mamani sohamasmi nitso me atta. This is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. When you do that, there's no ahankara, no mamankara, and no, mananusaya, underlying tendency to conceit. That's all the question. Now we get into the interesting, the rest of the sutta equally interesting anyway. Because then the sutta relates to us that in the mind of one of the audience members, that, there arose this thought, so material form is not self. There's no self involved there. This is what the Buddha is saying anyway. And feeling is not self. Sanya, what we call recognition, is not self. Mental formations are not self. Consciousness is not self. If that were the case, or if that is the case, literally he says, what self will actions done by the not self affect? And you have to explain, what is he actually saying there? He's saying, who's going to be affected by your karma? It's an age-old question. If that's the case, how is it that a deed done now is going to affect you in the future? Who's affected by it? Sounds like he's either confused. The Buddha doesn't think he's just confused. The Buddha calls him a moga purisa. The Buddha reads his mind. And he says it like this. He says, it is possible, bhikkhus, that some moga purisa, useless person, obtuse and ignorant, with their mind dominated by craving, might think that he can outstrip the teacher's dispensation. So, a skeptic, someone who was ready, a bhikkhu who was really, in a sense, derisive, I don't know what the word is, but deriding, ridiculing the Buddha's teaching, or looking down at the Buddha's teaching, doubting at the very least. And the Buddha says, they might think this to themselves. And then he says something that's actually, the Pali is apparently quite controversial what exactly it should be saying. So Bhikkhu Bodhi says, it's many different, there are many different Pali forms of the next sentence, but basically he's saying, I've taught you about this before. It's not an important sentence in that sense. It just means I've taught you the truth about this. And she's going to do it again now. It's a good, interesting question. If there's no self, how does karma work? How can you be responsible? Doesn't that mean that a person who does bad things can say, it wasn't me? Right? Of course, that seems ridiculous as a Buddhist, and especially as a Buddhist meditator, because we know there are laws, there are natural laws surrounding us. Yadisang vapate bijang tadisang harate palang. Whatever seed you plant, such is the seed. So whatever seed, such is the fruit that you shall reap. Kalyanakari kalyanam papakari cha papakam. A person who does good deeds will get a good result. A person who does evil deeds will get a bad result, evil result. So how does that work? right? Does he even explain it? He doesn't explain it, and it's curious. So he's not going to give an answer here. What is the self? How does this relate to self? How can you say, you experience the fruit of your actions? And Buddha said, basically he's saying, he doesn't say this, but basically his response is in the vein of, here's what I teach, and here's the result that it brings. All of that mental activity that's going through your mind right now, that's really a part of the problem. And it's what we're addressing. So he says, what do you think? Is material form impermanent, permanent, or impermanent? Aniccaṃ bhante, impermanent, Venerable Sir. And what is impermanent? Is that suffering or is it happiness? Well, it can't be true happiness. It's not happiness. So what is impermanent and not happiness? Subject to change. Is it fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this I am, this is myself. No hetaṃ bhante. No indeed, Venerable Sir. And this is you hear the Buddha teach again and again and again. This is the very core of the Buddha's teaching. It's in the Anattalakkana Sutta. Same with feeling. Your feelings, are they stable, certain, predictable? No. And can you depend upon them and say, oh, that's going to make me happy? No. Should you say they're me, they're mine? No. That certainly isn't me, isn't mine. Now these questions, I think it's important to understand that the monks would be also answering based on their practice. And the idea is that there's some meditating going on here. That the monks are able to really viscerally experience this. These things are not self. Here's this feeling, it's arising, it's ceasing. It's not under my control, it's nothing to do with any kind of idea I might have of me, of mine. And then he says, so this is how you should see. You should see these as, through your practice, see them as not me, not mine, not under my control, not myself. Then he says, and then he explains the important part, the new part. He says, seeing thus, when you see this, when you see non-self, and all these things, see them as not me, as not mine, a person who sees that becomes disenchanted. They lose their enchantment with them. No longer enchanted by things that can't satisfy you, seeing that you're just receiving more and more stress and dependence, slavery, as a result of your clinging to these things. You become disenchanted. Becoming disenchanted, being disenchanted, you become dispassionate. Through dispassion, the mind's liberated. When liberated, there comes the knowledge. One is liberated. One understands birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. Gataṃ karaniyam. I did what should be done. The work to do has been done. And he ends it there. That's the end of the sutta. There's no more coming to any state of being. Which is important and significant, because he didn't really answer the guy's question, or he didn't really address this. What he did was say, that's irrelevant. Your mental activity, it's irrelevant, that's your problem. Getting caught up in these ideas of, oh yeah, what is the self, and how do you describe, if there's no self, then what's this and what's that, right? That's not real. What's real is going on right now, and that's what the Buddha describes. He says, here's what's right. Here's what happens. You do this, you'll let go. You let go, you'll be free. You're free, there's nothing left to do. So quite often when people ask questions, theoretical questions, it's important to remember, and I try to remember to say, look, you're straying from reality with these questions. So often the response is that question really important for your path to freedom from suffering? Is it really involved? A better question might be, is it really involved with reality? Now, of course, there are questions. It's not just ridicule questions. There are many questions which are conventional. Like, how should I live my life as a Buddhist, and what should I do in this situation and that situation? They're not bad questions. But this question was a bad one, where he got caught up in thinking of self and so on. And so the Buddha says, I'll just stop it there. The Buddha says that you see non-self, you become dispassionate. You become disenchanted, and disenchanted you become dispassionate. When you're dispassionate, you become free. When you're free, there's nothing left to do. That's what we're here for. That's what we're following this path for, to become free. Everything else is just theory, and most of it is inconsequential or superficial, superfluous. So another good sutta, I think, a good one for us to keep in mind, definitely worth reading if you have a copy of the text. But that's the Dhamma for tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night.